Arcade Heroes.
Hey everybody, this is Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, here with a special episode, so to speak, on something that we don't often do, and that is a book review. Most of the time just recording arcade games and talking about them, reviewing them, or what have you, but today I'm going to cover a book that's arcade related, and that book is The Art of Atari by Tim Lapentino. It's a great coffee table book, not coffee book, coffee table book based on Atari's history and their artwork and some other things, so we'll get into that. But first, I guess just to show my Atari chops, I have been a collector of Atari hardware and games for many, many years. I own all of their systems from the Atari 2600 to the Atari Jaguar. I have some of the Atari computers, such as the Atari 800 XL and the Atari ST. And with arcade machines, I have several of those. I believe it's 9, including an Atari Space Riders pinball machine, which is a little bit rare. So when it comes to Atari, I've always been, I guess what you could say, a fanboy. I studied their history, have that Atari Inc. Business is Fun book, enjoyed reading that. Did a review on that, for that on the blog, and so instead of a video review. But anyways, let's get into The Art of Atari by Tim Lapentino. Okay, so here is the book itself. It's a hardcover, and great artwork that's used all over the top of it here, or the front of it, not top, gosh, I'm doing great today. But as you can see, a lot of these are arcade titles. Now this book does focus a lot on the Atari 2600, because that's their most iconic piece of hardware, but of course, each one of these, Missile Command, Warlords, Millipede, Super Breakout, Asteroids, each one of those is an arcade game, and that's where the Atari 2600 library got a lot of its strength from, or if not almost all of it, was from arcade ports. It really came onto the scene with Space Invaders by Taito, and of course they did the artwork for that for the cartridge version as well, the home version. Back cover has a little bit more, some quotes and all that. Very nice quality paper throughout. I believe it's 395 pages. Even has a nice little fabric bookmark so you can keep your place. So overall, the quality of the book is very nice. Open her up and get some screenshots from different 2600 games. On the contents here, so we've got the Pac-Man cover art there by Hiro Kimura, and in the contents you can see the different sections, but you'll notice here different artists, and that's one of the great things about this book is it has profiles of the different artists who created all of this artwork for Atari back in the day. And so it does have a section about George Opperman. He was a major player. He's no longer with us, died back in the 80s, but also has profiles on Cliff Spawn, Rick Gaitis, I hope I said that right, Susan Jekyll, hope I said that right, Steve Hendricks, Terry Hoff, Hiro Kimura, James Kelly, Warren Chang, Mark Erickson, Evelyn Seto, and then other sections cover things like coin-op, home consoles, industrial design, the analog process, prototypes, advertising, promotion. And so overall, this really is a great history book, covers a lot of that history for Atari there. And in fact, that's one of the first sections once we get past the introductions here, history. And this gets into the birth of Atari. I believe they got their information from the guys who wrote the Atari Inc. Business is Fun book, and so it's very accurate, not based on hearsay and those sorts of things. But as you can see, Atari started off as an arcade company, and so if you're interested in that stuff, then this covers it. Obligatory Steve Jobs reference, of course, and then getting more into the corporate side when the Atari 2600 came around. Now, in addition to the profiles, this is one part that I really appreciate seeing in here, this section called the Imagination Gap. And this may need a little bit of explanation. A few years ago, some of those clickbait garbage sites like BuzzFeed and Yahoo and some others ran these silly, poorly researched articles where they were mocking the box art and the cartridge art that Atari had come up with. Didn't appreciate the art, but it was also under the guise that Atari was manipulating its consumers and it was false advertising. Now, for anybody that actually grew up in that time, you know that that was junk, not accurate at all. Unfortunately, a lot of people read those articles, and so that's why it needs some mentioning or pushback. And so what the real motivation for these Atari designers was, it was making good art but also capturing the imagination of the consumers. And that's something that I remember doing as a kid, is I would hold a cartridge in my hand, I would look at the artwork before I put it in, and that got me into a mindset of, I guess, just an active imagination and thinking that I was really in the world of Berserk or whatever. And I know it sounds silly from an adult perspective, but for a kid, I mean, if any of you remember having active imaginations, that wasn't manipulative, it was imaginative. And I think that's what drives a lot of nostalgia these days, was the imagination behind the artwork and behind the games, and that filled in the gaps that the graphics maybe couldn't do. I mean, the games were fun themselves, but having that extra imagination drive there just made them more fulfilling, more satisfying. Even gets into the typography of where they got that font that's on so many of their cartridges. And there's George Opperman, Atari's visual soul, so he was the main guy driving their design, did a lot of their great artwork, came up with some of the characters, logos and things of that nature. But overall, this is an awesome book. Also even gets into the logo, where the Fuji design, as it's called, really came from. So here's the coin-op section. If there's any complaint I had about this book, it would be that this should have been a little bit larger. Just could have shown a little bit more from the cabinet art that they did. I mean, Pole Position 2 Environmental was pretty cool, but it wasn't the only one that was pretty cool to look at. Prototype design for T-Mech and some flyers. Just think could have put a few more of those into there and made that section a little beefier. As you can see, the home console stuff basically takes up the rest. But again, the consoles did drive a lot of what people know about Atari into the popular culture. The Atari 2600 being their best-selling piece of hardware. This gets into their other machines, of course, and I mean, even the Atari 5200 was billed as a personal arcade machine. The 7800 used some arcade graphics technology for the time. The Lynx had a lot of great arcade ports. Jaguar probably was their only system that didn't have a lot of arcade ports to it compared to everything else. But and this is where you get into the box artwork, and this covers a lot of it. But again, as mentioned earlier, this is where Atari was an arcade company first. Really, that's where their roots were based, and so you have a lot of these games that really were based on arcade titles, like in Combat, that took elements of Tank, which was very popular for the company after Pong. Jet Fighter was integrated into that as well. Indy 500 based on the Sprint arcade games. There was a whole series of that. Starship was based on Starship 1, even though the 2600 version did suck. That's something I can admit. Video Olympics was Pong and different variations of that. And so, I mean, really, all this stuff... Oh, here's an artist profile. It still touches on arcades regardless. And so if you're
just into arcades, there's still plenty you can find out of this, but I'm sure if you're into retro arcades, you're probably into retro game consoles just as well. And so, won't show all the book here. As mentioned, there's almost 400 pages to go through, but I mean, what's great about this book is you get a nice look at some of the artwork that on a cartridge just did not look the same, or you couldn't see all the details just because you didn't have that sort of resolution. And so just in looking at a lot of these pieces of art, or some cool Superman game design artwork there as well, I've noticed a lot of details that I never caught before looking at it, or like here's adventure, zooming in on some of that. And there's even some unused pieces of art that show up here once in a while, so that's cool to look at. And so overall, if you're interested in the process of design, marketing, art, Atari's history, video game history, arcade history, any of those, really this book is for you. Personally, I love it. It's one of my favorite things from 2016, one of my favorite gifts that I've got, and so this is really a great book and something that I can go back to time and time again. And so yeah, that's the Art of Atari. I won't spoil it all here. You'll have to pick it up yourself. It's available online, but actually we got this from a store here at the mall where I'm at, the Nerd Store, and so they actually had some copies, and so that was nice. But anyways, that's the Art of Atari, so thanks for watching this review, and we'll catch you next time.